name's Bruce Gunn, as was already said. I'm the Acting Regional Director for the region of Queensland, as we call it in the Bureau of Meteorology. I'd like to talk in 10 minutes about the seasonal outlook for Queensland. We do a whole lot of briefings similar to this for emergency services, where we talk about disaster preparedness and that sort of thing, but I'm going to change the focus of what we'd normally talk about into something a little more focused on agriculture. I also don't have a great agricultural background, but I'm here to learn a lot. When you look at the climate drivers for Australia and Queensland, there's a lot of factors at play. The El Nino is the one that gets talked about the most because, quite rightly, in Queensland it has the biggest effect. But there are others at play too. The Indian Ocean also has an effect in feeding in moisture from the northwest, where you can get cloud bands moving in with upper troughs over Western Queensland, and it can bring a sizable proportion of the rain. The northwest monsoon during the summer, the Madden-Julian oscillation, are all other factors that are at play. But by far and away the big one is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. I'm not going to go into detail about the El Nino. I reckon everybody here's probably heard about that before, so I'll skip over that and just get into more of the details about rain. And as the previous speaker pointed out, the last few years has been a bit of a roller coaster ride. Now in this graphic it shows in the years the actual colour coding is red for El Nino, blue for La Nina and black for neutral. So from 2009-10 we've actually got quite a wet El Nino, and I should say that the colour code on the right hand side, blue is for wet, red's for dry, and where it's dark blue it's the wettest on record, and where it's dark red it's the driest on record. So starting at 2009-10 you can see that we actually had a wet El Nino. They do happen. 2010-11 was of course a big La Nina, and we all remember the floods of 2011, which continued on in a lesser scale into 11-12, but it was 12-13, which is actually a neutral year, not an El Nino, where the lack of rain really kicked in. And as you can see from the next ones in 2013-14 and 2014-15, it hasn't really rained as it should on average since. So rainfall deficiencies, this time from left to right I've got the last 12 months in terms of rainfall deficiencies, where the dark red is the lowest on record. The middle graphic shows you the last 24 months, and of course the 36-month one is where it's really hurting, where you've got lots of Western Queensland, big chunks, really having a 3-year deficit that was really kicked off a couple of years ago. So what's happened since? These are the graphics for October of this year and so far into November, where we've had a little bit of scattered rainfall from thunderstorms around the inland trough. Very welcome, I'm sure, but nothing near enough, I would imagine. November's starting to look closer to average, but there's a long way to go yet. So what is average? This graphic shows a median rainfall for the country, and if you sort of look at that dark green colour, that's about 100 mils as a median rainfall, so half the years will be less than that, half the years will be more than that. So if you're looking at central Queensland around the Longreach area, perhaps you'd be expecting every other year to be around 100 mils. Temperatures of course are there as well, not so much a factor I expect. So last month what we had was a rather dire forecast, one that we didn't have any great pleasure in being correct about, was that October was going to be an extremely dry month, and it was. We had heat waves around the country, fire seasons starting earlier than they've ever started before, and just compounding an already desperate situation. So what we do at the Bureau is we have a 3-monthly forecast, what we call a seasonal outlook, The current one runs from November through to January. And there's some glimmers of hope, I think, in what we're seeing here. What's displayed there on the left is the forecast for November in terms of rainfall and the chances of exceeding that median amount. Now, it's still brown on the coast and up the top of Cape York, and that's telling us that the chances of it raining more than average are still fairly low. But the heartening thing is that the centre of the state is looking closer to normal, and I think that's what we're seeing with these scattered storms at the moment. When you go into December, the picture looks a lot different. We're getting the above average rainfall starting to return as the El Nino starts to break down. When you go into the 3-month composite for November to January, if I'd shown you that first, you would have thought, oh, well, that's looking so-so. But I think there's a bit of pain to come first before perhaps a little bit of relief. So what's driving that November to January forecast? There's a few things, and of course it's complicated. One of the things is that our forecasts, we're not very confident. They don't have a great degree of skill at this time of year, and that's what that graphic in the bottom right says, where it's the light coloured, not the green, is where we've got good skill. The white's where we don't have a lot of confidence in those predictions. The other things is what's happening with the sea surface temperatures closer to home. A lot of the El Nino indices are based on sea surface temperatures somewhere in the equatorial Pacific. What's probably more important for Australian rainfall is the sea surface temperatures closer to home. So you'll see off the northwest shelf there's some warmer than average temperatures, and that's perhaps indicating that the Indian Ocean's ready to release moisture into northwest cloud bands that might bring some relief from upper troughs. And then also the waters off southeast of Queensland are a bit warmer than normal, which probably is contributing to that little bit of green in the southeast corner. But overall, that's a more promising picture than we've had for quite some time. So, looking back in history, and history's a place where you start because that's what you know. The thing about climate change is that we're not always sure that what happened in the past is an indicator of what's going to happen in the future, but we will do with what we've got. So what I've identified here in the next couple of slides is previous El Ninos and the events and how they've played out. And that colour code of red and blue is the same as I explained in the previous slides. And I've made the years a little bit bigger and bolder for the really big El Ninos. And so when you look from left to right, you've got the October rainfall followed by November, December through to April as you go left to right. And you sort of see that the start of the El Nino where things are dry, they tend to break into above average rainfall, at least in the big one of 1905, not so much 1914. In fact, it went quite dry again after some rainfall relief at the end of that year. 1940, 1941, there's lots of these, but I'll just try and capture in your mind the big ones there. 1946 was a big El Nino, ended up with some quite widespread rain, February, March. 72, another case where it's flipped over at the end of the summer. 77, not so much. 82 was probably the biggest El Nino on record, that and the 1997 at the bottom of the chart there. So there's a bit of a pattern of how big El Ninos break down. Now it gets really busy. Top left there is, well, they're all strong El Ninos apart from the bottom right. The bottom right one is the last one we had in 2009-10. But if you try and look at the image at the top left of each square and you see the extent of the rainfall deficit and then what it goes to in the following season, and these are all the big El Ninos in 1906, 1947, 1973, 1983, 1998, and even the last one in 2019, even though it wasn't weak, it's the last one we've had, so it's some indicator of what the ocean atmosphere system does in reaction to these sort of events. So look, that gives us ground for some hope, looking at the past. These days we model the ocean atmosphere system in a dynamical sense. Previously our forecasts were statistical, it's based on what's happened in the past will happen again in the future, but with dynamical models we're now able to assess the ocean atmosphere system for what it's really doing. On the left is some graphics about the Indian Ocean dipole, on the right is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, but the areas in pink are indicating drying conditions to the Australian continent, and the blue is the La Nina type or negative Indian Ocean dipole event. So these are graphics from all of the weather models that are being run around the world, not just the Australian model, although the Australian one's in there, but they're all saying a couple of things. The Indian Ocean dipole's breaking down between November and March, so that's being taken out as an effect, and the El Nino's weakening from November to March as a sort of a unanimous vote that's what we're expecting to happen. Okay. Oh, you didn't have anything on the screen, did you? Sorry, I put that back. I'm talking to a different screen here. Apologies for that. Sorry. So look, I'll just recap that point. The graphics on the right are showing the El Nino Southern Oscillation strength from an area in the middle of the Pacific, but it's indicative of the strength of the dynamism of the whole event. In the November graphic, you can see that they're all indicating a strong El Nino that's currently in play, but it's weakening by March when you get to the graphic below it. The Indian Ocean dipole, which is the other factor that's affecting our rainfall, is breaking down, which is a good thing. All right, I need to check to my left rather than looking to my right. So the sea surface temperature anomalies are peaking this month or the next month in December, and most of the models that we've seen around the world are saying the same thing. When we try and estimate the uncertainty in what our models are telling us, we can do that by running what we call an ensemble. So we run the model lots of times, we tweak a little bit at the starting point and see how much it deviates off track. So what this graphic's telling you is the intensity of the El Nino as a whole Pacific-wide phenomenon. So you can see the solid lines leading up to where we are now in October, or we're at October when this forecast was run, and showing that it's getting to a peak in November and then starting to decline once you get into 2016. Each of those little fuzzy lines is a different model run, and the green line shows you the average of the lot. So the average trend is back towards normality, back towards neutral conditions. It's got to be said, though, that there are a couple of those scenarios that stay in the El Nino territory. They stay in the pink. On the other hand, there's a couple that deviate all the way down into the blue territory, being La Nina. But on the whole, you'd have to say it's a pretty high chance. It's a high proportion of those model runs that's saying that we're going to more normal conditions, which can only mean closer to normal rainfall. It's got to be said that we've never had a big El Nino year like we've got now go back to back. It's always broken down to some extent. Now, whether that means it's going to be a wet neutral period or a dry neutral period, we just have to wait and see. But the influence of the El Nino is definitely on the wane. I'm just going to finish off by mentioning tropical cyclones and just the chances of what they are. I think, you know, cyclones get a bad rap sometimes where they do damage and damage property, but it's actually what we need. We could actually use a weak monsoonal low through the Gulf of Carpentaria that tracked all the way down through Western Queensland and into New South Wales. So, you know, they do some good things, cyclones. And I have so many talks that I give like this that say exactly the opposite, where we say we've got to be prepared and are really fearful of cyclones. But as a rain-bearing depression, they're hard to beat. The chances are reduced for this season. In the Coral Sea, at least, you know, there's only around about a 27% chance that we'll get more cyclones than normal. But up north, around the Territory and the Gulf, the chances are a little higher that we'll get a normal number of cyclones, but it's still less than normal. But, you know, we can only hope that we'll get one of those monsoonal depressions that comes down through the Gulf. And that is the end of my talk. Thank you.